Welcome to class. Today we're going to be talking about culture. What is culture? Culture is about shared meaning. Now, language is the privileged medium in which we, quote, make sense, quote, of things, in which meaning is produced and exchanged. Meaning can only be shared through our common access to language. But how does language construct meaning? Language is able to do this because it operates as a representational system. In language, we use signs and symbols, whether they are sounds, written words, electronically produced images, musical notes, even objects, to stand for or represent other people, our concepts, ideas, and feelings. This quote is from Stuart Hall. So, last week we talked about institutions. And I tried to make the argument that sociologists argue that institutions are important. And we're going to be looking at the different aspects of institutions. And one very important aspect of an institution is culture. Culture includes rules, laws, beliefs, knowledge, ideas, identities, and values. What you should notice about all of these words, rules, laws, beliefs, knowledge, is that they're all about the interpretive and expressive side of social life. So, institutions have this socialization process where we internalize culture and we use that culture to interpret the world. So, think about this. Culture gives us language and identities to interpret ourselves and others. So if you're in school, you're going to use school culture. So what is school culture? What is the language of school? What are the identities that we're given by school culture? Student, teacher, administrators. In the family, we have identities like father, mother, wife, husband, partner, son, daughter, uncle, aunt, grandparent. This is all the language of the family, the culture of the family. In the criminal justice system, we have police, criminals, judges, and juries. And in the retail industry, we have customers, workers, and managers. And what I'm trying to get you to realize is that whatever institution you're talking about, you have a whole set of language that goes with that institution, and we have a whole set of identities. Here's another quote from Doyle McCarthy. Knowledge is best conceived and studied as cultural, and the various type of social knowledges communicate and signal social meaning, such as meaning about power and pleasure, beauty and death, goodness and danger. As powerful cultural forms, knowledges also constitute meanings and create entirely new objects and social practices. Sociology of Knowledge examines how objects of public attention arise, how social problems come to be defined, and the function particular knowledges play in this process. For example, the conflicts of nation-states and parties, between church and secular authorities, of rising classes, and such interest groups as women and people of color, of medical and technical elite, asserting social agendas for the unborn and the dying, are all concerned with the question, whose knowledge should decide? What this quote is saying to me is that our knowledge is cultural. Whether we're talking about Aborigines in some place being able to look at a plant and know exactly what it is and what medicinal qualities it has, or we're talking about a sociologist looking at the world through the lens of sociology. All of our knowledge is cultural because it helps us interpret reality. So I really like this chart right here. I kind of stole it from a guy named Kenneth Gergen. He's a sociologist and a psychologist. And he argues that depending on who's looking at you, you are a different person. So if you're standing in front of a biologist, he's going to say, you're a mammal. If you're standing in front of a hairdresser, he might look at you and say, you're a person who needs a haircut. A teacher might see you as college material. A gay man might look at you and think you're possibly straight. A Christian may look at you and think you're a sinner. An artist may look at you and say, wow, you're an excellent model. A psychologist might look at you and say you're slightly neurotic. A physicist might look at you and see you as an atomic composition. A business owner might see you as a future customer. A doctor might think you're a hypochondriac. A Hindu might think of you as an imperfect state of Atman. A California highway patrolman might see you as a breaker of the speed limit. And your children might see you as mom and dad. One of the reasons I like this chart is because it's putting scientists right next to other people. And it's saying that scientists are merely offering a different interpretation based on the institution they're part of. So the biologist says you're a mammal because the biologist has been trained by their biological institution and they've internalized all of these meanings and identities, and that's how they see you. Just like a hairdresser has been trained to look at you as a person who needs a haircut. So many people, I feel, when they think about culture, they always think culture is religion, culture is your family, culture is your ethnicity. And the really important point that I need you to walk away with is the sciences, each science, physics, biology, psychology, sociology, economics. They are culture just like religion is culture, just like art is culture. Each one offers a different way to interpret reality, interpret objects, and interpret people and themselves. So the main argument again, culture is meaning, knowledge, science, beliefs, common sense, ideologies, laws, rules, stories, myth, that's all meaning. And they help us interpret ourselves and others. Well, how do they do that? Well, knowledge, beliefs, common sense, it's all made of symbols, words, and sounds. So that's how you build a culture, is by stringing together multiple symbols, multiple words, multiple sounds, and eventually you build this very, very complex, dynamic meaning system, whether we're talking about, Superman or the Marvel Universe, or whether we're talking about microbiology. It's all about meaning, and it's all created by humans. The main argument is culture is meaning. Every idea in our head comes from the cultural part of one institution or another. And a good idea is to ask yourself, when you have an idea, what institution gave me this cultural meaning? Was it my school system? Was it my family? Was it my church? Was it a science? Was it popular culture? Was it sort of a subculture that I'm a part of? Like maybe you're a D&D player, maybe you're a baseball fan. That is a small institution that fills your head with knowledge. Another point that I need you to understand is that culture changes. So just think about this. Imagine we had a time machine and I went back to even 1980 and I said to my mother in 1980, I'm having a lot of trouble with HTML5 and I'm having trouble with the Wi-Fi in my home. It won't sync with my work account and I can't access all of my Microsoft Word files, and I tried to Google the solution, but I'm having problems. My mother would not understand one word I just said if I went back in time to 1980. Because Google didn't exist, Wi-Fi didn't exist, the internet didn't exist, Facebook didn't exist. All of those words, and culture is about language and words, did not exist. But it's not just technical words. It's not just words like Google and Wi-Fi. There are words that have died, and there are words that have been invented in my lifetime. So let's say you didn't know. The word teenager was invented in the 20th century, early 20th century. The word tween was invented in my lifetime. Somebody invented the word tween. It means a kid who's 10, 11, 12 years old. They're not quite a teenager, and they're not a child. They are a tween. That word was invented in my life. A lot of the words about being trans and a lot of words about sexuality were invented in the last, 30 years. There's a word called metrosexual, and that was invented in my lifetime. I've seen that word created. And there are words that have died. Culture is diverse, People argue about culture. What does this word mean? What does that word mean? How should we interpret this? How should we interpret that? There's a lot of diversity and a lot of argument about culture. I'd like to preview Lecture 2, Part 3. And the main argument of that lecture that I just want to preview is that if science is cultural, then we need to consider the fact that science is diverse and changing meaning system. What creates the diversity in science? What causes science to change? In the lecture that I'm previewing, I'm going to discuss paradigms, which is another cultural concept. This term paradigm is offered by a scholar of science named Thomas Kuhn to explain how science changes. He asks, what causes scientists to abandon old ways of interpreting the world and adopting new ways of interpreting the world? And he uses the paradigm concept. Many of the human sciences are multi-paradigm sciences, which means there are multiple ways of doing sociology, for example. And sociology has evolved. Consider this for a moment before we end. There are folks out there saying that the science tells us that we should get vaccinated for something like COVID-19. There's other folks that are finding YouTube videos by doctors saying we should not get vaccinated by COVID-19. Right there, those two medical doctors who are saying, one saying vaccinated, one saying don't get vaccinated, are working from two different medical paradigms. And I'm saying it's very important that we realize that all of our sciences, even physics and biology, you can find people who are working from different paradigms. Now, sometimes there are dominant paradigms. With something like global warming, I would argue there is a dominant paradigm about climate change and global warming. Can we find climate scientists who use a different paradigm, who say there isn't human-created climate change? Yes, we can. There are scientists out there. But the important point for a sociologist is they're using different paradigms. They're coming from a different cultural approach because they interpret reality differently, and that's where we need to focus.